Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. The Broadband Bunch Zero Touch Learning Series is live. I'm Craig Corbin. Thanks so much for joining us today. Today's session, subscriber-centric operations, why it's different, why it's necessary. The Broadband Bunch podcasts and Zero Touch Learning Series brought to you, as always, by Utopia Fiber, by DXTEL, and by your Zero Touch automation experts, ETI Software Solutions. Be sure to follow the Broadband Bunch on Facebook at facebook.com/the Broadband Bunch and on Twitter at twitter.com/podcast bunch. You can access Broadband Bunch podcasts on Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and iHeartRadio. A couple of quick reminders before we introduce our panel. Today's session, most definitely interactive. We encourage you to submit questions via the chat function, and our team will monitor those throughout the event. The session is also being recorded and will be available to all attendees for future access. Please feel free to submit potential topics for future Zero Touch Learning Series sessions, or if you would like to suggest any prospective panelists. And again, that can be done via the chat function. And thanks so much in advance for your participation. Our moderator today, a true telecom innovator and thought leader with more than 2 decades of experience with AT&T. During his tenure there, he led a number of transformative endeavors, including major systems integration and modernization in both the BSS and OSS space. In addition, he led architecture and delivery teams in the digital domain space for business to consumer and business to business channels. Our moderator, also the founder and principal of BevTech, the well-known consulting firm focused on digital transformation for software and services companies. It's a pleasure to introduce Guy Bavente. Guy, the baton is yours.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that introduction and those nice words. And welcome to our audience. We're hoping and we believe you'll find the topics today very interesting. You know, let's face it, as you heard, I've been in telecom for some time. And when I think about the automation journey of some of my past automation teams, I think it's fair to say that many telecoms started with what I consider a transactional approach. This is automating for key functions like ordering, provisioning, billing, payment, right? And I think it's also fair to state that eventually the automation focused in a category that I like to think about more in terms of business preservation. And we saw the onset of systems focused on things like fraud management, usage leakage detection was big, revenue assurance. And of course, eventually with other things, we saw how important it was for telcos to really wrap all these point solutions with a customer care product, usually a CRM, and the truth is most were purchased CRMs. But in my point of view, these remained point solutions, integrated, but yet point solutions. And I think telcos who got it right really focused on this shift to subscriber-centric operations and systems to support those operations. And that's our topic for today. And I have a great panel that I'd like to introduce that's going to help me with this discussion. First with us is Yogesh Gupta. Yogesh is a seasoned business leader, also known for his very transformational skills, also coupled with his ability to bring teams together from various aspects. He's worked with both product and service companies in North America, Europe, and Asia, and the United States, of course, with a focus across the delivery spectrum of the engineering cycle. His experience has been highlighted by progressive responsibilities and cross-cultural leadership, and he has focused on industries like telecom, retail, health, and others. So he currently works as the head of the North America Vertical Engineering and Innovation function at HCL Technologies. And I'd like to welcome you, Yogesh, to our panel today.
Hi, Guy and team. Pleasure to be part of this panel. Look forward to our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Yogesh. And next we have Christina Jensen. Christina has over 18 years experience in the telco space, and she has a wide range of experiences, but she has been heavily focused on analytics and modeling, right, to drive value to organizations. She's worked in digital for 10 plus years, also spent some time at AT&T. With that focus on digital adoption and building organizations and infrastructure to bring analytics into the forefront of decision making. She currently is focused on building a division in the United States of Dial My App. And this is a product that's focused on, and related to the topic we're discussing today, it's focused on how to take the customer service experience to the next level, right? Using some patented technologies. We're going to hear a little bit more on that later. So, Christina, I want to welcome you as well.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
You bet. And Sai-Kumar Dubagantu, and we just call him Sai. Sai is also with us here today. Sai is also a veteran in the telecom industry. In his career of more than 28 years, he has held many roles, usually in the delivery space. The spectrum of focus areas have included embedded software development, distributed computing, network management, cloud, and more. He currently works as the head of solutions delivery at HCL Telecommunications, and he's engaged in both network transformation and digital transformation. Welcome, Sai.
Thank you, Guy. It's good to be here. Hopefully, we'll have a good conversation today.
We will. And you know, Sai and Yogesh, I want to congratulate you all. I saw a recent announcement from the Everest Group, where HCL Technologies was named as the #1 software engineering firm. And let me tell you, I saw who else was in that leadership quadrant, and this is a big deal. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, Guy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get into the conversation. Yogesh, I'd like to start with you. And I mean, again, few would disagree that understanding your customer needs and their wants is critical in any business, definitely in telecom, but in any business. Now, the truth is, in my experience, it's sometimes challenging to know what the starting point should be, okay? So where would you suggest is the best place to start in developing a subscriber-centric solution?
So very interesting question, Guy, you brought it. And I've seen that in the industry, one thing which is very important is that putting subscriber first in your core of business is something which is extremely important. The journey starts right from the scratch. You can start your designing the experience at the transactional level and take it further towards strategic level. So I categorize primarily in 3 areas which needs to be addressed and looked upon by any organization. First thing is looking into addressing the functional silos, trying to see that if you are able to bring a seamless experience for subscriber and customer experience. Second piece, which I have noticed is, which is a bigger problem in majority of organizations, are bringing a common definition of customer centricity or subscriber centricity. How you are able to do bringing more analytics and seamless data on the table. And third, not to mention, which is very important, is bringing a right culture mindset. So aligning the culture for your subscriber need is something which is a core of the subscriber centric mindset. And the journey can start from any of this point to start with.
Great. Yeah, you know, my experience was spot on with your first statement on the functional silos and starting there. In fact, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later on the cultural mindset, because I think that's also an important aspect. Sai, I'd like to come to you next. You know, again, when I led these IT delivery teams, the truth is we were often burdened by very antiquated, what we call legacy systems, right? Which usually means old and complex, right? And the question to you is, can a telecom, an operator that's burdened with these legacy systems, can they still adopt and pivot to a subscriber-centric model? And if so, maybe a couple of ideas on how.
Sure, Guy. It's a standard question, that people look at these days. Very good question. The answer obviously is yes, it can, and we have been doing it for many years now. There are different ways to look at it. Typically, a few things always we start with, in the beginning. One is we look at what are the functional components in these legacy systems. What are they doing? And Yogesh mentioned, for example, analytics. That's a very good thing. Another very important aspect is the workflows. All these legacy systems, as legacy as they are, right? They all have a really important workflows they are dealing with. And last, one of the important things, I wouldn't say last, there are many more, but the interactions they have with external systems, maybe outside the company or within groups in the company. So you look at all these things, and you sort of have to chart, what's going on there. And then you can look at various ways. For example, workflows are key. Some legacy workflows are not easy to deal with. So, we have done a lot of workflow migration, recently in the last 4 or 5 years, where you make them seamless, enhance them a bit, offer more capability in there. Maybe, also some of those really legacy ones, which are older technologies, maybe your COBOLs and stuff, you sort of front them with some microservices type of stuff, so that, you can sort of streamline what they are offering. And then finally, many times these days, we are also going to cloud. That, as technological as it seems, actually gives you some subscriber benefits as well in your responses, the way you do, and the way it integrates with other solutions. So these are some of the important things one can look at, Guy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I can relate to the point that you made about workflows and understanding the workflows. I mean, we think about understanding the legacy systems, but what about the legacy workflows that are really connected to those legacy systems?
Exactly.
Maybe a related question, and Christina, I'd like to come to you next. And my question is going to be focused on data, right? So in order to adopt this subscriber-centric model, how important is understanding your data and also the data you have and the data that you need?
So I think this is a key element in really becoming very subscriber-centric, right? Because without the data, it's very hard to be relevant and timely in your engagement with the customer. So it's really a critical element and certainly worth to invest in. Now, I think the challenging piece that I can relate to looking at my previous organization, right? We spend a lot of time looking at what's the right data we should be acquiring. How do we actually go about getting access to that? How do we leverage that in the process and insert it? So that's another element, right, that you have to kind of look into. And I would say it's really a little bit of a journey, right? First, to understand what are the key elements that's really relevant for you, and you kind of crawl, walk, and run in that process. And then as you start to become, very knowledgeable about your customer and how they're engaging with you and how they want to be engaged with, then you kind of walk up the ladder a little bit and become more prescriptive in your engagement with that. And as you go through that journey, right, your data really has to follow, and your data structures have to kind of follow to be able to support that.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, your data following also resonates. I kind of see it almost as an evolution. Your organization change, understanding your data needs to change. Yogesh, I'm going to come back to you, and you brought up culture, and this question actually is related to culture. So when I think about a subscriber-centric operation in telecom, I automatically go to all the touch points. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking call centers, stores, right? Online, of course. I don't want to forget the digital channel. I think from what I saw, there's a tendency to leap to the systems and the solutions, right? But how important is to get alignment across these touch points from a cultural perspective?
And Guy, you brought a very good point. And sometimes we tend to look for the results where we don't understand the journey and the foundation element of it. Key to foundation of what we have seen in our experience working with variety of customers, what we have noticed is that we need to define the common definition of your subscriber centricity. What do you mean by that? The thought process and the conversation should move away from what are your profit and revenue for this quarter versus to what value you are providing to the customer. What are the products and offering you are able to bring on the table?
Right.
Two components which come as clear cut in my mind is saying that while we are focusing on bringing anywhere, everywhere, or omni-channel experience on the table, we should not lose the competitive landscape which localization and local piece bring. What we have seen in the industry is that, based on our experience, that you need to bring the you need to define the matrices which is aligned with your subscriber first culture, because without and that to be defined at top bottom, that's one piece. Second is majority of time when the executives are at the board level, they are defining subscriber centric as a centerpiece of their KPI. But when the message goes to the down below to the employees on the ground, it gets diluted. So again and again, if the communication becomes very centric and unified, keep on harping on the message that how are we looking and bringing the subscriber value as a centerpiece versus revenue, profitability, or different metrics, that changes the complete mindset. It's a combination of mindset as well as understanding of common definition is something which is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think about Cotter and how he defined changing culture, and the key thing that you brought up, of course, that we've all heard, starting at the top with the right messaging, but also establishing, to add on to what you said, you know, a sense of urgency, right? A sense of urgency that we need to do this, I think is pivotal in a cultural shift. Sai, you know, we have this discussion in telecoms, and you know, we basically say we need to focus on culture and really the workflows and the organizations and such. And the operations folks, in my experience, would quickly say, right, this shift is great, but again, we need the right systems to support this shift to subscriber centric. And really the question to you is related to the earlier one. Can you actually pivot to a subscriber-centric model without, I'll call it, a meaningful investment in technology?
I think this you are on a roll, Guy, today, asking all good questions. So this no, you're always, you know. So in my opinion, yeah, you need a lot of new investment, right? Because if you are talking legacy, you know, if you go back 20, 30 years, the tooling is all different, and you cannot do these days with the new tooling. You can do a lot of fun stuff and more effectively, right? You can go towards the journey which Yogesh was talking about, right? It all, you know, we can define all these things, but to actually accomplish them, you need the right tools in place. You know, as simple things as your ticketing system, you know, may be really obsolete, and you know, you need to bring it up to date, because the latest ones, you know, offer a wide range of capabilities, you know. And one thing that comes to mind, Guy, is, you know, these days there are a lot of systems in place which are collecting data from an operations perspective. But you know, to analyze the data, you know, this goes back to Christina's point earlier, right? You know, how do you deal with data? And what I'm seeing these days is that there's a lot of focus on AI ops, right? Adding some kind of, you know, intelligence on top of all these data sources, collect them together, and then do some intelligence on it. So basically, to give some simple, you know, make some simple things like, you know, even order fallouts, for example, right? Take care of them in a more proactive fashion, if you will, not wait until, you know, a lot of alarms go out in different areas, right? So we are seeing a lot of value there, you know, in doing AI ops. We have a lot of engagements in that area. You know, the idea is to, you know, how do you reduce your mean time to resolution, right? That is one of the key metrics, you know, going back to what Yogesh was talking about. You know, even that seems to be a it's a known thing for a long time, but seems to be a big part of the latest cultural shift, if you can say that.
Yeah, very good. I agree. I mean, I think a key point, investing in the right tools, it's paramount. Just to restate what I think is a key point here, I don't think you can escape, an investment in modernization. At least that's my point of view. On that note, though, Christina, what typically happens is we get the big question, yeah, we're going to invest. Do we build or do we buy? So my question to you has to do with that. Given all the tools, right, that are available, and whether it's CRM or just any software as a service solution, there are many. Does it make sense for carriers, service providers to spend any time attempting to build their own?
So while there's a lot of learnings involved with trying to build on your own, I would really caution this. I think I can think back to numerous initiatives that I've seen where short term you get some benefit or some value, but long term very quickly becomes very difficult to scale. And I think there's really some decisions that you have to make early on in the process. Also be mindful of, where are we going long term? This is where we are today, but where are we really trying to go? What are the capabilities we'll need in the future? And how do we build a foundation that we can key off of to enable that? So I would say another word of caution is, just look for the culture also. And I think that's another element, what's the tradition within the culture? And again, just kind of be mindful of where you are right now, where you want to go, and how quickly can you scale to those changes and navigate that, because this may not be the area that you're best in class in, right? So if you want to deliver best in class service, it's really hard to keep that up over time. So I would certainly caution with that.
Yeah, I agree. I bet you this question will be asked, forever: build versus buy, different points of view.
Yeah.
Yogesh, I'd like to come back to you. I was reading an article, I believe, to give credit, this one was put out by Deloitte, and it focused on the UK market. And I think it applies worldwide. But basically, the study said that a customer-centric business, in their findings, can be 60% more profitable than one that hasn't adopted the strategy. And I don't know, sometimes when I read these numbers, like everybody else, you're cautious on accepting them. But even if it's off by 20-30%, right, it really does give you a cause to pause and think about, wow, could we be missing out on something? So accepting that there is a benefit, right, and studies have actually put dollars to it, I'd like to have you share some thoughts on what are some of the key ingredients to get to developing the subscriber-centric strategy. What are some of the things that you've seen?
So very interesting question, Guy, and you hit the nail in that. In my experience, organizations who are heavily focused on the subscriber-centric operation creates more value. And I'll give you the ingredients, what you rightly asked the questions about the key ingredients. In my experience, everything revolves around feedback, voice of customer, how closely you are hearing the experience from the customer, and then how you are reflecting and implementing in your back system, right? That is one thing which is extremely important. Second thing is, when you talk about hearing from customer, not only you're hearing from your customer, you're also empowering your frontline. When I talk about frontline, is that again goes back to the same point, that experience certainty from your digital as well as store level, or any touch point of wherever subscriber is talking or connecting with the organization is extremely important. I strongly believe that in a subscriber centric model, I personally track the statistics in primarily on customer lifetime value, which is basically is that organizations who are able to spend more on subscriber centric model are able to generate more customer lifetime value versus customer acquisition, and that reflects the level of maturity you're bringing in this model. And this is a journey, right? You actually, while you're focusing on acquiring more and more customer, you're not losing the eye from retaining your existing customer for longer duration. In terms, you're making that business more profitable.
Very good. And Yogesh, I love the comment on, the feedback loop. I think about it like a loop, but I would also add that you need to do something with that feedback, right? You really need to do something with that. Okay, another shift. I'd like to go back to you, Sai, and really the perspective here is more from the network side of operators, and maybe even more specifically thinking about service fulfillment and service activation, an area that continues to require attention for flow through. In a subscriber-centric fulfillment model, I think to achieve that, you have to move away from just thinking about the physical network, right? And I think you have to make that shift where you bring that customer experience, right, in provisioning into perspective. So with that, and thinking about the network and fulfillment and activation, what are some of the shifts that our audience needs to start looking at and embrace, really, to support a subscriber-centric model?
Sure, guys. So if you just talk about the network side, right, virtualization, people call it different names, SDN and FE, and these are all, this is causing a major network transformation shift, right? So you can scale your network much faster than before. You have been through the trenches for a long time. You know the value of that, right? The implementation. If you go back like 15 years, if you have a new device, it takes a lot of time to come to the market, right? It goes into the labs and stays there for a long time. So, to get across those hurdles, this whole virtualization, makes life easy. Now you can scale the network faster, you can upgrade it, update it, configure it in different ways. So that's a very key aspect. And you can see, at least, in today, I can say I'm probably between 5 and 10 projects of that sort I am involved in. And but that does not stop there, because when you make all these changes to the network, the layers above the network also have to have equivalent changes. Your OSS, which is used to your old ways of working, sort of needs to learn the new ways, right? How does it actually start orchestrating newer deployments, NFVI deployments and stuff? And how does it deal with the new types of alarms that come in? So it won't be the old traditional stuff, right? There's a couple of things. And even if you take it one level up, right, to the BSS, especially if you look at enterprise customers, right, the delivery these days for those customers is probably in many weeks, from the time you order to when you actually get the service. And there is always an effort to shrink it. So, we are doing work in several places where this whole order to cash, as you say, right, or order to bill, whatever format you follow, that how do you improve that process? How do you interconnect all these systems which exist within these carriers, so that you can actually deliver the service to customers faster? Because service fulfillment and activation is your first impression of the customer, right? The longer he waits, the diluted the experience becomes, right? So I think these are some of the aspects people need to look at, when they talk about network transformation.
Yeah, great points. And you transform your network, you transform not only the OSS side, as Sai said, and the BSS, but you're going to have issues, and you're going to have to call, your service provider. In fact, I had an experience recently, but that's for a different day, maybe a different conference. But let's talk about when you make phone calls, and you actually reach a call center. I spent a great deal of time in this area, and I get asked a lot about it, Christina, where we did a study on call center technologies and, quite frankly, CTI, the integration of those technologies into the call center. Let me ask you a two-part question, right? And I also want you to bring, if you don't mind, some thoughts from your current practice in Dial My App. So the two-part question, as we shift our thinking, how important is it to focus on how the customers want to be serviced, right? And then maybe give me an example or two of how you're thinking about this with Dial My App.
Sure. Yeah. So no, I think as we continue to move into this digital age, and right, especially as those digital engagements have or experiences have really key impacts on the customer and the impressions that we're making, I think it's really key that you have a good understanding of how you engage there effectively. So one of the things that we do at Dial My App is that we give customers the choices, right? So we know this from a large study that we did that Accenture did that showed that well over 60% of customers prefer to dial in. And basically what we do with our approach is basically that we allow the customer to call. We serve up a digital menu that gives them omni-channel choices, right? That allows them to engage with the company on their terms, whether it be via text or chat, continue the call, or resolve their issues digitally. And so I think as companies are really thinking about how they can differentiate themselves digitally and create a unique experience that's memorable, I think this is really key that you say, I get you. Here are the options. How can I best engage with you? And by the way, based on how you've interacted with us before, we think that these are some choices that are relevant for you at this point in time.
Yeah. Choices on the spot, right?
Yeah. At
We've
your
always talked
fingertips.
about choices, but on the spot, right? I prefer that over, hey, can we call you back?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, it's time to mix it up a little bit, and we're going to pick up the pace here and move into the lightning round, one of my favorites. So here, of course, we just need a short reply. I'm going to give you the hook if it's not short, okay? So I'm going to ask each of you the same question. I want to go in this order. We'll go Christina, Sai, and Yogesh, and we'll do our best not to mix up the order. So my first question has to do with customer segmentation, okay? From a service perspective, we've been talking a lot about service. What's your opinion on the following? Segment your subscribers where you provide the best service to your best customers. Good idea or bad idea? Christina.
I think that's a bad idea. It's going to come back to bite.
Sai.
Bad idea.
Yogesh.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bad idea.
Yeah, too bad all three of you are wrong. Nah, just kidding. Single pane of glass. I've seen many decks and everybody talks about single pane of glass. So we know what that means. One view of your customer. But, my question has to do is, has it really worked? So here's the question. Is driving a single pane of glass strategy, right? Where you can see everything about your customers, a single pane. From your experience, is this a good use of money or bad use of money? Christina.
I think this could sometimes be putting lipstick on a pig, so be aware of that.
Okay, a non-answer. Very good, Christina. You're a consultant at heart. Sai.
I'll go with a non-answer too. It's somewhere in between, guy.
Okay,
No,
that wasn't a
360
choice.
degree view is always important.
Yogesh, how about you?
So I think that I agree with both of these guys respond, because it's of a case-to-case basis, because you need to, you cannot be simply focused on one way and trying to paint the picture for all the customers, because each customer is different.
Yeah, although I'm teasing, I think the fair point is be careful. It's not always the answer. So, make sure you understand it before you invest. Next quick question. When I talk to many telecom companies at different tiers, right? Tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, most will say, but we're already subscriber centric. So in your opinion, is this mostly hype, a reality, maybe just a dream? Christina.
I obviously think it depends on the company, but in general, I would say it's probably a lot of hype around that.
Sai?
I think it's closer to hype than reality. There are a few places where it may be reality.
about you, Yogesh?
I agree. It's still far from reality. Still, I feel that there is a lot of hype around it.
Yeah. If you had to pick just one now of what, and focusing on obstacles, right, to achieve a subscriber-centric operation, and from your experience, you had to name just one obstacle, what do you think it would be, Christina?
I think it'd be lack of focus, having a clear goal.
Good. Sai?
I would, I would go with systems. The right systems are not in place, to take it to that level.
Related to an earlier question. Yogesh?
I think that removing the silos, right? Removing the silos and bringing the standardization, common definition of the subscriber centric.
Very good. And then my final lightning round question really has to do with what we've all experienced with the pandemic, and that is work at home. And again, another study, this time I believe it was Ernst & Young, and I think the early one I said was UK focused, but that was global. This one here was definitely UK focused. And that study said that 40% of customers that they surveyed because of work at home put a higher value on network reliability than network speed, right? Now, there were still some that said, hey, give me speed any day. But, the majority put more value on reliability. So the quick question to you, do you think in the United States, reliability of a network will surpass speed or already has? Christina?
I think yes for now. I think, but I think it might be short term. I think as the evolution is going, I think it might be driving an appetite for more speed long term. But right now, I would say yes.
How about you, Sai?
I agree, Guy. I think we are there where they are both where you want them to be, sort of, from a general consumer perspective. And as
Very
you
good.
go into this 5G and some of the other initiatives, some of these changes will start to happen.
Okay, very good. Just a reminder to the audience, I see some questions already coming in, but just as a reminder to go ahead and post some questions. I have one final question before we go to the audience question for each of you, same question for each of you. And some of you already started hinting at this, okay? It has to do with key performance indicators. What do you measure, right? So when you think about the subscriber-centric operation, what are some of your favorites KPIs that you think need to be measured? Let's go in the same order. Christina, let's start with you.
Well, I think as we shift, right, I think really looking at it from an experience perspective, so quality of experience, and again, kind of going back to ringing the bell of the customer and being able to effectively measure, did I actually solve your issue? Did I do a good job of that? And I think as you shift in that, right, I think you look for small opportunities that you immediately can pivot to, get success with that, and then figure out how to scale that to do more and more. I think that's kind of how you address that.
Very good. Sai?
So I know in addition to that, Guy, we discussed service activation and fulfillment earlier. From that point of view, one of the important things we track always is order fallouts. The importance of that. How many orders are actually getting stuck, and what is the time to resolve them? This is a very key parameter in terms of customer satisfaction.
Great. Yogesh, your thoughts?
I strongly believe on customer lifetime value, which is how long that same customer is sustained with the organization. So I strongly track that metrics with customer acquisition versus customer lifetime value.
Very good. Hey, Christina, if I may, I want to come back to you. You used quality of experience. I've actually read some things on this. I think most of us have heard of QoS, right? The quality of service. And I think traditionally, telcos have been focused on QoS. Shifting to QoE, is that realistic when the embedded thinking has been, QoS? Can you effectively take on a QoE point of view, and any thoughts on how to do that?
I mean, I honestly, if you really believe it and you can think it, I think anything is possible. But I really think that you have to let your mindset shift change, right, and really focus on, from an experience perspective, what are the key ingredients that you need in that, and how do you measure that? And so I kind of come back to, you can't just pivot overnight, right? It's a little bit of a journey. And so look for those small opportunities where you have the ability to measure something that's really key into the experience, and do that well, and then figure out, okay, now let's take on a few others and expand that mindset. And I think with success, more success comes, right? So start small and then think big, but always have kind of the long-term perspective in mind in terms of where we're going, so that you can plant and lay a foundation that can scale to that over time.
Very good. Okay, we got a couple questions here, so I'm going to, if you're all okay with it, I'm going to move to those questions. And if one of you wants to take it, just feel free to jump in. And if I think it belongs to one of you, I will definitely assign it. This question has to do with service cost. And the question says, when we are talking of subscriber-centric operations, how does the cost of service impact the subscriber? How does the cost of service impact the subscriber? Anyone want to take a shot?
I don't know if the question means. Yep. I'm trying to interpret the question, Guy. No, if it means that while we are going subscriber centric, we incur some costs and that raises the service cost. In that case, what do we do? Typically, what we are seeing is that in the approach, at least in the last few years, that the costs, basically we in going to a subscriber centric model, there is always some savings on the operation side. We are trying to balance that with the implementation costs. So at the end of the day, the service cost itself is not increasing, right? And it's ending up being beneficial to the customer. And many times when we, for example, do a cloud migration or something like that, in a couple of years we are reaching the point of return for that. So overall, I think from a subscriber perspective, there's always benefit in terms of some of these changes we are talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add to that. I think that's a really good viewpoint. I think one of the things that we see in our space with my app is that as we really focus in on the experience over time, we generally see a pretty hefty call shed to come along with that. And often in our conversation, when we start out with customer, that's a big focus, right? We can save, costs, we can create a better experience. But as we go through it and we engage with that customer, we kind of see the mindset changes, and it really becomes more about creating a really good digital experience. And the focus really becomes around how can we make something that's unique and that makes the customer want to engage with us and continue the rate that they're engaging with us. So I would say the benefit is it's the hook in, but oftentimes what we see in our area, it really leads to a better customer experience. So it becomes a little bit of a balance, right? So net, I think, the subscriber is going to win out.
Yeah, maybe I'll add my thoughts and then we'll take another one. Hopefully we're reading into the question correctly. But when I think about the cost of service, the truth of the matter is all telecoms have been focused on cost. I've yet to work with one or at one that says, hey, we're not worried about cost. I think, though, you have to focus on the right variables and where you're set, because it does impact, to the question, a subscriber-centric shift. And I'll give an example. I mentioned the CTI assessment study we led in my organization some time back. And when we looked at, what was happening on the calls, we found that we had some significant things like, abandoned calls handed off without first answer. And when we looked underneath it, it was expensive to keep customers, but one of the metrics that, it's fair to say was just a disaster was call handle time, right? And how long are people on the phone with customers, right? Because I had a call center once, and watching the queue of all these customers used to make you go nuts. But so it does have an impact, is my point of view. But when you assess what to address from a cost perspective, you need to be very conscious, right, that your ultimate goal is to service and aim for answering the customer's question on first attempt, or solve the problem on first attempt. Let me take the next one. A compliance question. Always good ones. Compliance is always a good motivator. And do you see any compliance drivers or pending legislation that will force telco operators to accelerate a subscriber-centric approach? Have some thoughts on compliance?
That's a good question, Guy. Let me go again to start the conversation, right? So, I mean, if you go back for a long time, we have some regulations, right, around 911 or number portability, if you go back maybe 21 years ago. And there is some laws around privacy that are coming. You could theoretically call all of these as subscriber-centric regulations, right? But I think, if we want to go to a system where, a normal, like you took the example of work from home, and in that context, if you want to have some kind of regulations on how to make that possible more effectively, I think we are not there in terms of regulations yet, right? Or legislations. So that's an area, maybe, with the advent of 5G, some of that may come, a few years down the road, as more and more services are packaged and the subscribers are purchasing a lot of these things. I am expecting there will be some review of this, by the lawmakers, if you will. And at some point, I think, they will have some rules for the operators to operate under, right? That's my view.
Very good. Anybody else want to chime in?
No, I think that
I
just
go
want
ahead,
to add,
Yogesh, please.
I just want to add what Sai said is that in my view, new compliance and new regulations also brings opportunities for subscribers as well as providers, because it gives a very unique way of unique models which we can bring, and then bring a gain more market share by leveraging those compliance. And I've seen that shift happening in the industry in last many years by bringing any kind of regulations. So.
Yeah. I would add, I was thinking about, am I aware of any that I think get at the heart of what I really mean by subscriber-centric approach? And I don't know that I'm familiar with any that I would say, yep, and this pending legislation may. So, I may just not be aware. But I will tell you, my reaction is that the regulators should absolutely focus here. Maybe they will naturally, as we continue to see, the evolution in our industry. I think the regulators may shift and should shift their thinking to actually support a subscriber-centric approach. Okay, let me keep scanning here. Okay, ooh, I like this one. How will blockchain technologies, right? We've heard about blockchain. How can blockchain help or maybe even change the subscriber-centric model? Is there a place for it? Some thoughts on that. Sai, this is kind of in your area. You want to give it a shot?
I can give it a shot, Guy, but as you know, it's its own topic. We probably need a couple of hours to discuss, how blockchain
I'm not doing
actually
anything.
helps. But in general, I think the answer. In general, I think the answer is yes, and we have been involved in some initiatives and also in some research in this area. And we talked about network transformation earlier and VNFs and VNF onboarding and the ability to modify and upgrade the networks. That requires a complex oversight of what's happening. I think blockchain is a very good has a very good potential to be used there. And another is with 5G, all the industrialization You have a lot of these IoT sensors and all that, and security becomes very important there, and being able to track who is doing what or which device is doing what. I think there is another good application of blockchain in that area. And even in order capture, I think when you talk about enterprise order capture, for example, there is more complex orders when they come from enterprises, right? And there's a lot of order splitting that goes on. This is a traditionally accepted use case, actually, that you split the order, you send it to multiple systems, then how do you track what's going on? And I mean, one of the most talked about is identity management, and I'm sure everybody can guess the value of blockchain in that area, right? And with all this eSIMs and technology going in that direction, I think there is a lot of value for blockchain there. These are some of the most talked about use cases, Guy, but there's a lot of stuff. I think when new methods of paying comes in, right? I think blockchain will play a more important role there.
Yeah, it's funny that you use the example of order orchestration. You may have used a different term, because that's what came to mind too. Because blockchain kind of has a self-governing aspect to it, right? And when you think about orders that require the handling of multiple partners, sometimes maybe even competitors, right? I think blockchain definitely has a space there in the order decomposition, orchestration, and eventually fulfillment. Okay, let me take a quick look at time. We have some more time before we close, and we have another one. Okay, let's see. The telco industry is notoriously slow, good start, to evolve due to complexity and reluctance to change existing revenue models. Can operators change this mentality? I'll ask the second part. So it's notoriously slow, right? Due to some of the complexities. Can operators change this mentality? And then the second part of it, are there any strategies that create space for operators to move in this direction? Who wants to take a first shot at it?
I think this question, there's a lot of aspects here to consider.
Go ahead, Christina. Go ahead, Christina. You started.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I think there's a lot of aspects to this to consider. And I think there is, just again, speaking from own experience, right? I think culturally, I think you have to look for ways to generate a space where people can set goals that have, and if you look at Google, let me step back for a second here. If you look at Google and other companies like that, their strategies when they set their goals and their achievement out, basically everyone is required to have a goal around that has 50% chance of actually coming through. I think introducing that type of mindset as you're looking at how you can make these types of changes is helpful, right? To create a space where people can actually think outside of the norm and think outside of that. So I think that's one element to look at, to say, are there things there that we can deliberately do as we look at pivoting this to create this space to drive into a direction that's outside of where we are today.
Sai, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to add to it, right? The question about will the existing revenue models, right? If you look at some of the changes that are happening in the 5G, I'll go back to 5G for a moment, especially in the private networks, if you take that as an example, where traditionally operators have been giving this service to enterprises. Now there is an alternate channel which enterprises are looking at, directly get it from the equipment vendors. So there is a competition already developing in that area. Who will the enterprises go to? And therefore the operators are sort of being forced to change their model, right, and come up with better options because they want to keep the customer or subscriber to themselves. So I see that change happening in the enterprise area. I think with the introduction of 5G, as they introduce more services to the consumers as well, and and there is a lot of opportunity for independent players or independent software vendors to actually compete in that market. That will sort of, I think, in the next few years, bring some changes, specifically the slowness and the reluctance, right? I think definitely there will be change in that area. You can see some of that already happening, in some of the bigger carriers, right? How they adapt to this change in the network.
And
Yeah.
I'll add one more point, Guy, here, that and the changes are happening at the right at the leadership level also, where you can see the folks from Google's and Yahoo's of the world are joining these operators at the leadership position. So there is a mindset is changing, right, from millennials, addressing to millennials and Gen Zs.
Yeah, great thoughts. First, I agree with the notion that, if we're being honest, the telco industry has been notoriously slow due to the complexities. But when I think about the revenue models, I remember earlier I made this comment that you need a sense of urgency, kind of borrowing from Cotter's thought. I have seen the sense of urgency, and usually it's been a threat to the revenue model. Now I'm aging myself now. I remember when the local exchange carriers and the long distance carriers were fighting over long distance and revenue, right? And a lot of money was spent with regulation, lawyers, systems, and then all of a sudden wireless comes in and LD is free, and all of a sudden, so it's a motivator. Over the top streaming, right? As opposed to a direct connection. And then cord cutting comes into play. Those are motivators. So it's happening right now. I agree with that comment. I think it's going to accelerate. So with that, great thoughts. Let me turn it back over to you, Craig, to bring us to a close.
Oh, masterful job, Guy. Great conversation. So many things. Loved the lightning round. I was very intrigued with the responses regarding the pursuit of a single pane of glass approach. Very diplomatic. I thought that the response regarding the biggest obstacles, the lack of targeted focus, phenomenal. With regard to each of our panelists, Sai, your thoughts regarding the ability to make the transition of legacy workflow operations smooth and streamlined was huge, and then reducing mean time to resolution, requiring a change in culture sometimes. Yogesh, your remarks I thought very notable regarding the alignment of multiple touch points and then the value being added for the customer and the sense of urgency there, keeping subscribers at the center of the focus. And then from Christina, with regard to investment, build or buy, the ability to scale for future growth, so important. And then the call center question regarding the tremendous impact on subscribers and giving them immediate options for choice and how they engage the company. The quote of the day, though, I thought, Christina, you nailed it when you said you can't pivot overnight. It's a journey. And that, I think, is sometimes for many providers the hardest lesson, the expectation of making those changes immediately. Phenomenal conversation. A huge thanks to all of our panelists. Guy, great job. Again, thanks to our sponsors for the Zero Touch Learning Series, Utopia Fiber, DXTEL, and ETI Software Solutions. That's going to wrap up another great session. We look forward to the next one. Thank everyone for your time, and thanks all our great questions from our audience today. Thanks for attending, and that will wrap it up. Thanks for letting us be a part of your day. We'll see you next time right here on the Broadband Bunch Zero Touch Learning Series. So long, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.